My son-in-law paid for a luxurious safari in Africa so that I could finally see lions and elephants. But when I returned home early and approached the door, I heard his voice on the phone. The guide will do everything quietly. A crocodile or a buffalo. It's an accident, and no one will suspect anything. I froze. I smiled. And I thought, okay, boy, let's see which one of us has an accident. You won't believe what I did. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The Phoenix heat followed me through the front door like something alive, clinging to my shirt despite the air conditioning humming somewhere in the walls. I loosened my tie. 10 hours at the dealership always left a ring around my neck, and stopped in the foyer. Voices, low, careful voices coming from the living room. 2 weeks of silence, and now they were talking. I'd refused the money. $35,000 for another one of Melvin's investment schemes, the kind that always sounded brilliant until the money disappeared. I'd called it wasteful. Frances had looked at me like I'd struck her, then turned away, and neither of them had spoken to me since. I walked toward the living room, each step deliberate. They sat on the leather couch, Frances and Melvin side by side, an envelope resting on the cushion between them. The air felt heavy, thick with something unspoken. Frances glanced up first, her expression carefully neutral. Melvin stood, and I noticed his smile didn't quite work. Too wide, too sudden. What's this? I stayed near the doorway, one hand still on the frame. Ben, Melvin gestured at the envelope. Frances and I have been talking. About the argument. About everything. We want to make things right. Open it. I didn't move. 2 weeks of cold shoulders, and now an envelope. The pattern was familiar. Charm following anger. Gifts following demands. But something in Frances's face made me step forward. She looked softer somehow, almost like the daughter I remembered. I took the envelope. Inside were boarding passes. Thick cardstock with airline logos. Business class. My hands started shaking before my brain caught up to what I was reading. Tanzania? Melvin, this must have cost... How did you... I looked up from the tickets, searching his face for the angle. There was always an angle. I've been putting away my bonuses for months. His voice came too quickly, rehearsed. You always talked about Africa, remember? At Frances's birthday dinner 3 years back. We want you to finally go. You've earned it. I stared at the tickets. $12,000 minimum for a package like this. Melvin, who hadn't hit a sales target in 6 months. Melvin, who complained about gas money. Frances moved then, crossing the space between us faster than I expected. Her arms wrapped around me before I could process, and her voice came soft near my ear, hitting something deep and old inside my chest. Dad, you work so hard. You give us so much. Let us give something back to you for once. Please, we want you to have this. She squeezed my hand the way she used to as a child, that specific pressure I'd forgotten about. I felt my resistance crumbling like sand. Maybe I had been too harsh. Maybe Melvin was finally growing up. Maybe they actually... I don't know what to say. My voice cracked, and I hated that it did. This is incredibly generous. Maybe I was too hard on you, Melvin. Thank you. Both of you. I pulled them both into a hug, closing my eyes against the sting behind them. When I opened them again, I caught something, just for a second, a flicker in Melvin's smile. But Frances was warm against my shoulder, and I pushed the thought away. When do I leave? 3 days, Melvin said. Gives you time to pack. Get your affairs in order. 2 weeks in Tanzania. Safari, lodges, the whole experience. 3 days. I looked down at the tickets again, at the word Kilimanjaro, printed in bold letters. My dream. The one I'd mentioned once, maybe twice, in passing years ago. They'd remembered. How did you pay for this? The question came out before I could stop it. Ben, come on. Melvin's laugh sounded genuine. Don't overthink it. Just enjoy it. You deserve a break. The dealership will survive without you for 2 weeks. Frances pulled back, her eyes meeting mine. Promise us you'll actually relax. No checking emails, no worrying about us. Just be happy, Dad. Be happy. When was the last time someone had told me that? I promise, I said, and meant it. They stayed another hour, talking about the itinerary, the safari lodges, the wildlife I'd see. Frances made coffee the way I liked it. Too much sugar, not enough cream. Melvin told a story about a customer at the dealership that actually made me laugh. For those 60 minutes, we were a family again. After they left, I sat in my study with the tickets under the lamplight. The paper felt expensive, official, real. Africa. After 30 years of talking about it, dreaming about it, postponing it. I picked up the framed photo on my desk. Frances at 7, missing her front teeth, laughing at something I'd said, her whole face bright with joy. Where had that little girl gone? When had she learned to look at me with calculation instead of love? But the tickets were in my hand, heavy, real. Maybe the little girl was still there, buried under years of Melvin's influence, and maybe this gift meant she was coming back. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe it. Tomorrow, I'd start packing. Tomorrow, I'd let myself feel excited instead of suspicious. Tomorrow, I'd trust my daughter again. I turned off the lamp and carried the tickets upstairs, placing them on my nightstand where I could see them first thing in the morning. In the darkness of my bedroom, I touched them twice more before sleep came, just to confirm they were real. They were real. Sunlight cut through the blinds before 6, harsh and white, the way Phoenix mornings always were. I woke with the tickets already in my hand. I'd reached for them sometime in the night, half dreaming. They were still real. Tanzania was still real. I stood before my closet, pulling out khaki shirts and lightweight pants, when the memories started. The suitcase itself triggered the first one. I'd bought it 8 years ago for Frances's college graduation trip, a tour through Europe she'd been planning since sophomore year. Then Melvin appeared, and suddenly the trip was for 2. Dad, you understand, right? This is important for us. I'd understood. I'd paid for it too, just like I'd paid for everything else. 8 years. I folded a shirt and counted backward. Frances was 27 when she brought Melvin home, her eyes bright with new love, her voice asking if they could stay just temporarily until we get on our feet. I'd said yes because that's what fathers do. Temporary became permanent. The guest room became their room. My house became our house. I created a position for him at the dealership, $65,000 a year despite zero experience in sales. Watched him miss target after target while other salespeople worked weekends. The Lexus I gave them for their anniversary cost $45,000 I couldn't really spare. Their wedding, $28,000 for one day. Flowers wilting in the heat. A dress Frances wore once. A cake we ate in 15 minutes. How much had I spent? Not in dollars, though those numbers were staggering enough. How much had I spent in dignity, watching my daughter's thank you transform into, it's the least you can do? How much in hope each time I convinced myself the next request would be the last? I found one of Frances's childhood photos somehow wedged in my sock drawer. 10 years old, braces catching the light, genuine smile. I couldn't remember when I'd put it there or why. She wore her soccer uniform. I'd coached that team, spent every Saturday morning on fields across Scottsdale teaching her to pass, to shoot, to keep going even when she was tired. When had she changed? I traced the timeline while folding pants. Gradual, insidious. Small requests became demands. Could you help? Became, you need to handle this. Affection became transactional. Hugs when she needed something, silence when she didn't. I'd watched my daughter disappear for years, replaced piece by someone who looked like her but talked like Melvin. But maybe the tickets meant something. Maybe. I checked the clock. 2 hours until I needed to leave for the airport. I zipped the suitcase and carried it downstairs. The drive to Sky Harbor took 40 minutes through heat that shimmered off the asphalt. My car's thermometer read 109 degrees at 10 in the morning. At a red light on the I-10, I pulled the tickets from my jacket pocket and ran my thumb over them again. $12,000. From bonuses. Melvin hadn't hit a sales target in 6 months. How does a man failing at his job save $12,000? But I didn't turn around. I merged onto the airport access road and parked in long term, checking the tickets one more time before locking the car. Security, gate, boarding. Everything moved in a haze. Business class meant legroom, meant wine I didn't drink, meant flight attendants who smiled with actual warmth. I watched Phoenix shrink below, the city grid giving way to desert, then mountains, then nothing but clouds. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I studied the photos on my phone. Frances at 15, at 20, at 30. I could see the change happening in real time, frame by frame. The way her smile got smaller, the way her eyes got harder, the way Melvin appeared in more and more pictures until he was in all of them, his arm around her shoulders, his influence seeping into every expression on her face. Maybe I'd been unfair. Maybe I'd been so focused on what they cost me that I couldn't see them trying to give back. Maybe this was their way of saying they finally understood. Maybe. The layover in Addis Ababa lasted 4 hours. I walked the terminal in circles, too nervous to sit, too tired to think clearly. Then another flight, shorter, the cabin filled with tourists speaking German and French, and languages I couldn't identify. Tanzania appeared through the window like a painting. Vast golden plains, scattered green, mountains in the distance that could have been clouds, except they weren't moving. Mount Kilimanjaro rose in the far north, snow-capped despite the equatorial heat, impossibly beautiful. Kilimanjaro Airport was small, efficient, cooler than Phoenix but still warm. I moved through customs in a daze, got my passport stamped, collected my suitcase from a carousel that squeaked with each rotation. "Mr. West?" A man stepped forward, mid-40s maybe, fit, wearing khaki safari gear and holding a clipboard. His smile was professional, rehearsed from years of greeting nervous tourists. "Yes, that's me. Joseph, I am your guide for the safari. Welcome to Tanzania." His handshake was firm, but his eyes were already scanning my face, my posture, something I couldn't identify. "First, very important, you have your diabetes medication, yes? You took your morning dose? The altitude and heat can affect blood sugar levels. We must be very careful with your health during the safari. Very careful." I blinked. "I have everything I need. I've been managing this condition for 15 years, but thank you for the concern." Of course, of course." He checked something on his clipboard, glanced at his watch. "But I must ask, any dizziness, fatigue, unusual symptoms? The journey was very long. You must tell me immediately if you feel unwell. It is my responsibility to keep you safe." The way he said responsibility felt odd, like he was reminding himself more than informing me. But I was jet-lagged, overwhelmed by new smells and sounds, too focused on the fact that I was actually here, in Africa, after all these years. "I feel fine," I said, "just tired from the flight." "Good, good. The vehicle is outside. We drive 3 hours to the first lodge. You rest, drink water, take your medications on schedule. Very important for a man of your health condition." He reached for my suitcase and I let him take it. Through the airport doors, the African air hit me, dry, dusty, carrying the scent of distant rain and something else I couldn't name. Adventure, maybe, or possibility? Joseph walked quickly toward a Land Cruiser parked in the safari company area, checking his watch again when he thought I wasn't looking. I climbed into the passenger seat, still dizzy from travel, still carrying the hope that maybe, just maybe, my daughter had finally come back to me. The canvas walls of my tent glowed amber with dawn. I woke to sounds I'd never heard before, bird calls that weren't cardinals or sparrows, distant grunts that might have been wildebeest or something larger, wind moving through grass that went on forever. My glucose meter sat on the small camp table beside the cot. 118 mDL. Normal. I took my morning pills, dressed in the khaki shirt I'd packed specifically for this, and stepped outside. Joseph stood beside the Land Cruiser, binoculars already around his neck. "Good morning, Mr. West. Ready for your first real safari?" The next 4 days were wonder compressed into hours. Dawn drives where golden light spilled across plains that seemed to curve with the earth itself. Zebra herds moving like living rivers, their stripes blurring into motion and pattern. Elephants silhouetted against Kilimanjaro's impossible snow-capped peak. I photographed lions lounging in acacia shade, watched giraffes bend those absurd necks to drink, saw cheetahs teaching cubs to hunt. Joseph knew everything. He could identify birds by their calls, explain why elephants bathed in specific mud holes, predict where leopards would rest during afternoon heat. We fell into an easy rhythm, early starts, long drives, his stories about the ecosystem filling the spaces between animal sightings. At night, I sat outside my tent, under stars so thick they looked painted, thinking, maybe I'd been wrong about Melvin. Maybe the gift was real. Maybe my daughter hadn't disappeared after all. The shift came on the 5th morning. "Mr. West, we should walk closer to the watering hole." Joseph pointed toward a muddy bank where water turned opaque 50 feet from shore. "Perfect angle for crocodile photographs. They're very active in the morning. You'll get spectacular shots." I studied the murky water, the way the surface broke in places that might have been logs or might have been something else. My safari guidebook had been explicit about crocodile safety. Maintain distance, never approach water's edge in active zones. The zoom lens works fine from here, Joseph. But the detail, the authenticity, you need proximity for that. Trust me, I've done this hundreds of times. Very safe on this bank. His insistence carried an edge I hadn't heard before. I'm good where I am. Something flickered across his face, gone before I could name it. That afternoon he suggested approaching a buffalo herd for authentic close-up photographs. Buffalo, the animals my guidebook called one of Africa's most dangerous, unpredictable, even without provocation, responsible for more tourist deaths than lions. Joseph, I think we maintain distance from buffalo. The guide said they're aggressive. Only if provoked. We'll be careful. But his tone wasn't careful. It was pushy. No, we stay in the vehicle. His smile tightened. Of course, Mr. West. Whatever you prefer. The sixth day, I woke from an afternoon nap and stepped outside for air. Voices carried across the small camp. Joseph's voice, speaking English, rapidly into his phone, pacing near the perimeter fence. He's too careful. It's not working naturally. I can't just push him into the water. There are other tourists. No, he won't take risks. I froze behind my tent wall. Joseph's back was to me, his body language tense, frustrated. He was reporting to someone. About me, about risks I wouldn't take, about things not working naturally. I retreated silently, my heart hammering against my ribs. Inside the tent, I sat on the cot and tried to make sense of what I'd heard. Joseph wasn't just a guide. He was... What? What wasn't working naturally? Why did he care whether I took risks? The pieces wouldn't fit together, but they rattled around in my mind, keeping me awake that night, making every distant animal sound feel threatening. On the 8th morning, I woke feeling wrong, sweating, shaking, vision blurred at the edges. I fumbled for the glucose meter, 310 nosdl, too high, dangerously high. I'd forgotten last night's medication, distracted by that phone call replaying in my head. When I told Joseph I needed to leave, cut the trip short, get home, manage this properly, his face drained of color. Mr. West, that's not necessary. He spoke too fast, hands gesturing. We have excellent medical care at the main camp. Dr. Kamau, very experienced with diabetes. You don't need to leave. You paid for 2 weeks. You should stay. Let us take care of you here. I'm booking a flight home. Tomorrow, if possible. Please reconsider. This is manageable. We can. Joseph. I kept my voice level. I'm going home. His professional mask cracked. For just a moment, I saw something that looked like panic. I spent my last day arranging the early departure, changing the Ethiopian Airlines ticket, packing while Joseph hovered, making increasingly desperate suggestions. Drive to the medical camp first. Wait another day to see if the levels stabilize. Extend just 3 more days. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I didn't understand what, but every instinct I'd developed in 40 years of business negotiations was screaming at me to get out. The plane lifted off from Kilimanjaro the next afternoon. Through the window, Tanzania shrank below, golden and beautiful and somehow sinister. I'd escaped something. I knew that much. But what? The question followed me across the Atlantic, through the layover in Addis Ababa, all the way home. The Phoenix night air hit me at 12:40 a.m., still 85 degrees even at this hour, dry heat radiating from concrete. I stood outside Sky Harbor's terminal, exhausted down to my bones. 30 hours of travel. Jet lag pulling at my thoughts like weights. But my glucose levels had finally stabilized, and I was home. I hadn't called Francis or Melvin, wanted to surprise them, show up early, maybe have breakfast together. Part of me hoped to catch genuine relief on their faces when I walked through the door. The taxi ride through empty Phoenix streets took 40 minutes. Dawn was just beginning when we pulled onto my quiet Scottsdale street, the sky shifting from black to deep purple, stars fading. 6:25 a.m., according to my watch. I paid the driver quietly, hefted my suitcase from the trunk. My house looked peaceful. Porch light still on. Francis's car in the driveway, everything normal. I used my key on the garage side door, not wanting to startle them awake with the front entrance. The house was dim, silent except for voices from the kitchen. I checked my watch again. 6:30 a.m. Who was awake this early? I left the suitcase by the garage entrance and moved toward the sound, walking carefully across tile floor in my travel-worn shoes. The kitchen door was slightly ajar, light spilling through the crack. I raised my hand to push it open. Melvin's voice stopped me cold. "Tomorrow's the day. The old man should be done for." I froze, my hand suspended in air. Through the crack, I could see Melvin's back, phone pressed to his ear, pacing near the coffee maker. "The guide I hired will handle it, make it look like an accident. Crocodile attack, or maybe a charging buffalo. Either way, problem solved." The floor tilted. My legs went numb. "Yeah, I know, 12 grand was steep, but it's an investment, right?" Melvin laughed. Actually laughed. "Once he's gone, we get the house. Worth at least $850,000. Plus the dealerships, the accounts, everything. Francis already lined up a notary who can rush the probate. We're talking 4, maybe 5 million total. Worth every penny." I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The kitchen, the hallway, my entire world compressed into that crack in the door, and Melvin's casual voice discussing my murder like a stock trade. "Francis, she's fine with it. She was the one who suggested it, actually." His tone shifted, almost admiring. "Said we've waited long enough, that her father's had a good run. We deserve to live our lives now, not wait another 20 years for the old man to kick off naturally." Francis suggested it. My daughter, my little girl who I'd coached in soccer, who'd held my hand at the zoo, who'd cried in my arms when her mother died. She'd suggested killing me. The $12,000 gift. Not reconciliation, not love. Assassination. They'd sent me to Africa to die. Joseph wasn't a concerned guide checking my health. He was an executioner, assessing his target. The watering hole, the buffalo herd, the desperate phone call when I proved too careful to kill easily. 8 years of supporting them, giving them everything. A home, jobs, money, love. And they'd repaid me by plotting my death. I stood paralyzed for 30 seconds. That felt like 30 years. Through the crack, I saw Melvin laugh again at something the person on the phone said. That sound, easy, cheerful, discussing my corpse like a punchline, snapped me into motion. I couldn't confront them. Not now. Not without proof. Not without a plan. My hands shook as I backed away down the hallway, each step careful, praying the floor wouldn't creak. I picked up my suitcase from where I'd left it, let myself back out through the garage, closed the door with infinite care. The dawn light was brighter now. I stood at the end of my driveway, the house I'd built, paid for, shared, and pulled out my phone. Called another taxi, whispered the request. 10 minutes. The driver arrived in 10 minutes. I gave him the address of the Hilton in downtown Phoenix, 15 miles away. As we pulled away, I watched my house recede in the side mirror. Francis's car still in the driveway. Porch light still glowing. Everything looking normal while inside, my daughter and her husband celebrated my impending death. My hands were steady now, the shock crystallizing into something colder, harder. I thought of Francis at 7, gap-toothed and laughing. I thought of Melvin's smile when he'd handed me those tickets. I thought of how close I'd come to dying alone in Africa, believing until the end that they loved me. "All right," I said quietly, so the driver couldn't hear. "We'll see who survives this." The businessman in me was already calculating. Document everything. Build the case. Execute with precision. They thought I was dead or dying. They were probably checking their phones every hour, waiting for Joseph's confirmation. Good. Let them wait. Let them think they'd won. And then I'd show them what real consequences looked like. My face felt calm, but in the taxi's rearview mirror, my eyes looked like ice. The Hilton lobby was quiet at 7 in the morning. Business people with rolling luggage moving toward breakfast. Morning light cutting through floor-to-ceiling windows. I checked in using a business credit card linked to the dealerships, one Melvin and Francis didn't monitor. The clerk handed me a key without much conversation. Room 847. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished doors. Rumpled clothes from 30 hours of travel, gray stubble, eyes that looked ancient, but underneath the exhaustion, clarity, cold, hard clarity. For 2 days, I didn't leave that room. August 10th and 11th blurred together. Room service trays stacking up, legal pad filling with notes. I wrote everything I knew. The $12,000 gift, Joseph's excessive health questions, the dangerous suggestions at the watering hole, the overheard phone conversation, 8 years of financial history, timelines, amounts, dates. I was building a case, not for police, but for myself. My phone buzzed occasionally. Francis, Dad, are you okay? Haven't heard from you in days. I didn't respond. Let them wonder. Let them worry that something went wrong in Tanzania. The businessman in me took over. This was like planning a hostile takeover, except the target was my own family. By the morning of August 11th, I'd identified the problem. No concrete evidence. The overheard conversation wasn't recorded. Joseph was in Tanzania, probably paid and gone. If I went to police now, Melvin would claim it was a joke, hyperbolic venting. Francis would cry, play confused. They'd accuse me of paranoia, diabetes-related confusion, old age. A criminal trial takes years, costs hundreds of thousands, destroys everyone publicly, might fail. But there was another way. I didn't need criminal court. I needed civil control. My money, my property, my business, my terms. August 12th, I researched family law attorneys in Phoenix. Found Rick Holloway, 52, partner at a mid-sized firm specialized in estate planning and family disputes. Reviews praised his aggressive representation. Consultation fee, $450 per hour. Expensive, necessary. I booked an appointment for 2 that afternoon. His office occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower downtown. The waiting room had leather chairs and a view of the mountains. At exactly 2 o'clock, Holloway's assistant showed me into his office. More glass walls, more mountain views, a desk that probably cost more than most people's cars. Holloway stood, shook my hand. Gray hair, expensive suit, eyes that assessed quickly. Mr. West, what can I do for you? I told him everything. The tickets, the safari, Joseph's behavior, the overheard murder plot. He listened without interruption, pen moving across his legal pad, expression neutral, but the writing getting faster as the story unfolded. When I finished, he set down his pen and leaned back. Mr. West, I believe you, but belief doesn't win cases. What you have is testimony about an overheard conversation, inadmissible in criminal court, easily denied. However, he paused, steepled his fingers. You don't need criminal court. You need asset protection and estate control. That we can do immediately and legally. Explain. Here's how this works. You fire Melvin tomorrow. Arizona is at-will employment. You don't need to give a reason. You reclaim any property titled in your name. You change your will to disinherit Francis completely. You watch them panic. When people are desperate, they make mistakes. Let them hang themselves. I nodded slowly. Yes, this was war, but fought with paperwork and lawyers, not violence. Cleaner, more permanent. How quickly can we change the will? Holloway checked his watch. I can draft it this afternoon, have it witnessed and notarized by end of business today. The moment you sign, it's legally binding. Francis goes from inheriting $2 million to inheriting $1. Quite a change. $1. The minimum required to prevent a successful contest. Do it. He worked for 2 hours while I sat in his conference room drinking coffee that tasted like it cost $20 a cup. Through the glass wall, I watched him typing, making phone calls, printing documents. At 4:30, he returned with a stack of papers. Your new will. Your current estate is worth approximately $4.5 million. 3 dealerships, the Scottsdale house, investment accounts, retirement funds. The old will split everything 50-50. Half to Francis, half to various charities. This new version gives Francis exactly $1, with the remainder divided among organizations focused on elder abuse prevention. Elder abuse prevention? Fitting. He called in 2 associates to witness. I signed 3 copies, each signature crossing out my daughter's future. The pen scratched across paper with finality. A notary stamped the documents with officialness that felt like closing a vault. One more thing, Holloway said as I prepared to leave. Don't tell them you know. Play dumb. Let them think they're safe. Watch what they do when they believe they've gotten away with it. You'll learn everything you need to know about who they really are. I shook his hand. Thank you. My pleasure. And Mr. West, they tried to kill you for money. $1 is generous. I took a taxi back to the Hilton. In my room, I sat on the bed, holding copies of the new will. 8 years I'd supported them. A home, jobs, money whenever they asked, and they'd repaid me by trying to make me crocodile food in Africa. Francis's face floated through my mind. 7 years old, missing her front teeth, laughing. That little girl was gone. Had been for years. Maybe she'd never really existed the way I remembered. I put the will in my suitcase and tried to sleep. Tomorrow, I'd face them. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. August 14th, 6 o'clock in the evening, I sat on my hotel bed, phone in hand, composing a text message to Francis. My thumb hovered over the screen. This was the opening move. Once I sent this, there was no going back. I typed carefully. Dear Francis, arriving home tonight. Flight delayed a week due to technical problems in Africa. We'll be home around 9 p.m. Love, Dad. Read it twice. Press send. The message delivered immediately. I watched the screen. 3 minutes passed. Then, Dad, we were so worried. Can't wait to see you. The heart emoji felt obscene. I didn't respond. At 7:30, I checked out of the Hilton. Thanked the front desk clerk who'd been professionally distant for 4 days. The Uber driver who picked me up was maybe 25, playing music I didn't recognize, making small talk about the weather, the brutal Arizona summer that never seemed to end. He had no idea his passenger was a man returning from the dead to haunt his would-be murderers. I tipped him $40 when we reached Scottsdale. He seemed surprised, grateful, the last normal human interaction I'd have before stepping into my war zone of a home. At 9:15, deliberately 15 minutes late to increase their anxiety, the Uber pulled into my driveway. Every light in the house was on. They were waiting, watching through windows probably, wondering if I was real or some kind of mistake. I took my suitcase from the trunk and stood for a moment, looking at the place I'd built 30 years ago, paid for with sweat and 18-hour days at the dealerships, shared freely with a daughter I'd loved more than anything. 4 days ago, I'd walked away heartbroken, devastated. Now I was returning as something else, something colder, an architect of justice. I walked up the front steps, key already in hand, and opened the door. I'm home! Francis and Melvin appeared from the living room like they'd been launched. Their expressions hit in sequence, perfect theatrical progression. Shock first, faces draining of color so fast I could almost see blood retreating, mouths opening slightly in that cartoon surprise that would be funny if it weren't so damning. Then confusion, brains struggling to process impossibility. He's supposed to be dead, torn apart by crocodiles or trampled by buffalo. Why is he standing here with a suitcase looking tired but alive? Then fear, naked and raw and unmistakable, before desperate smiles plastered over everything like masks they'd grabbed at the last second. Dad! Francis rushed forward, movements too fast, too jerky. Oh, thank goodness you're home. We were beside ourselves with worry. You didn't answer any of our texts. We thought something terrible happened. She wrapped her arms around me. Her whole body trembled like she was freezing in 100-degree Phoenix heat. Melvin hung back near the living room entrance, one hand gripping the doorframe like he needed support. Ben, what happened? With the flight delay, I mean. We expected you back days ago. We were going to call the embassy or something. He was fishing, desperate to understand why I was alive, how their plan had failed, whether their cover was blown. I smiled, let Francis step back, and launched into my carefully prepared story. I'm so sorry for worrying you both. The safari was absolutely incredible. Everything I dreamed of and more. I gestured toward the living room. Can we sit? I'm exhausted. We moved to the couch. I deliberately took my usual spot, forcing them to sit across from me where I could watch their faces clearly. Africa was magnificent, I continued. The lions, the elephants, watching the sun rise over Kilimanjaro. But on the 8th day, my blood sugar spiked. Nothing serious, but at my age, you can't be too careful when you're that remote. I decided to come home early, and rescheduling the flights took forever. Phone service was terrible out there. I should have found a way to contact you sooner. Frances's right hand kept moving to her necklace, touching it, dropping away, touching it again. A tale I'd noticed when she was 12 and lying about homework. Now she was lying about wanting me alive. Melvin poured himself whiskey from the bottle on the side table. His hands shook, amber liquid sloshing against glass. I can't thank you enough for this gift, I said, watching them squirm. It was truly life-changing, seeing those animals, that landscape. I'll remember it forever. You two really surprised me with your thoughtfulness. They were trapped, terrified but unable to ask the questions burning through their minds. Why are you alive? What went wrong with Joseph? Does he know we tried to kill him? Forced instead to play the relieved, loving family. We're just glad you're safe, Dad. Francis's voice came too high, strained. Of course, Melvin added quickly. That's all that matters. I pulled out my phone. Want to see pictures? I took hundreds. For the next hour, I showed them safari photos. Each image required comments, exclamations of wonder, questions they had to pretend to care about. Look at this lion pride. See how close the elephants came to the vehicle. Isn't Kilimanjaro beautiful in the distance? Francis and Melvin exchanged constant glances. Quick, panicked eye contact they thought I didn't notice. I noticed everything. Melvin drank 3 whiskeys in 40 minutes. Ice cubes rattling in his glass. Liquid disappearing faster each time. Frances excused herself twice to the bathroom. The second time, I heard her whispering urgently into her phone through the door. Don't know what happened. Joseph hasn't... We need to... Her voice too low to catch everything, but the panic clear enough. Around 10:30, I yawned theatrically and stretched. I'm exhausted from all the travel. Think I'll head to bed. Of course, Dad. Rest well. Frances stood too quickly, relief flooding her face at the prospect of my departure. I picked up my suitcase and climbed the stairs, feeling their eyes boring into my back with every step. In my room, I locked the door and sat on the bed. Then I allowed myself a smile. They were panicking, drowning in terror and confusion. Good. Let them panic. Let them spend the night wondering what went wrong, whether I suspected, what to do next. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. August 16th, I woke at 5:30 to silence. The house still asleep. Frances and Melvin probably exhausted from their anxious vigil the night before. I showered, dressed in my charcoal gray suit, crisp white shirt, burgundy tie, armor for battle, each button fastened with purpose. I studied my reflection not from vanity but from readiness, checking that the man in the mirror looked capable of what came next. I skipped breakfast at home, drove to the flagship dealership in North Scottsdale. The building looked different today, not just my business, but my weapon. I arrived before staff, let myself in through the executive entrance. In my office with the door closed, I reviewed Melvin's sales records one final time. 6 consecutive months below target. Customer complaints documented. The numbers didn't lie. At 9 o'clock sharp, I sent the email. Come to my office, now. Melvin walked in at 9:30 wearing yesterday's clothes, looking haggard. He attempted a nervous smile, trying to pretend everything was normal. Hey Ben, what's up? Something about the inventory? I didn't invite him to sit. Standing behind my desk, hands flat on the surface, I delivered the words with surgical precision. Melvin, your employment is terminated effective immediately. 6 consecutive months of substandard performance. 40% below acceptable target. Multiple customer complaints documented. You'll receive $5,000 severance. You have 1 hour to vacate the premises. His face went white, then red. What? You can't fire me. I'm your son-in-law. Francis will never forgive you for this. That familial connection is precisely why I tolerated your incompetence for so long. But this is a business, not a charity. Sign the severance agreement or leave with nothing. Your choice. He sputtered, tried to argue, to plead. I pressed the intercom. Security to my office, please. 2 guards arrived within minutes. Through the glass walls, the dealership staff, people Melvin worked alongside for 8 years, watched as he was escorted to his cubicle to pack his belongings into a cardboard box. His face burned with shame. Some colleagues looked away, embarrassed. Others whispered, probably having wondered for years why he still had a job. I watched from my office window, arms crossed. Melvin's hands shook as he packed. A coffee mug, a framed photo of Francis, a desk calendar. 8 years compressed into items that fit in one box. The guards walked him through the showroom to the parking lot, every step visible to customers, salespeople, technicians. The walk of shame made concrete and public. He signed the severance papers before leaving. He had no choice, needed the money. $5,000 for trying to murder me. Quite the severance package. This was just the beginning. That afternoon at 2 o'clock, while Melvin was still processing his termination, Rick Holloway's office sent a certified letter to my home address. Francis would sign for it. Francis would panic. The letter was formal, detailed, devastating. It informed them that the 2022 Lexus ES 350 they'd been driving remained titled in my name. As property owner, I was exercising my right to reclaim the vehicle. They had 48 hours to surrender keys and registration, or I'd report it as unauthorized use. Signed by Holloway with his bar number prominently displayed. Legal. Binding. Merciless. I arrived home at 7 to chaos. Frances was in the living room, mascara streaked down her face, the letter crumpled in her fist. Melvin paced like a caged animal, still carrying his cardboard termination box, the pathetic remnants of 8 years visible through the open top. The moment I entered, Frances screamed, "What are you doing? You fired him. Now you're taking our car? How are we supposed to live?" I set down my briefcase calmly, loosened my tie with deliberate slowness. My voice came quiet, controlled, more devastating than shouting could ever be. The car is titled in my name. When I purchased it 3 years ago, I kept the title for insurance purposes. That makes it legally mine. I'm simply reclaiming my property. Melvin exploded, crossing the room toward me before catching himself. We've done so much for you, taken care of you. This is how you treat family?" I looked at him with cold eyes and asked the question that made them both freeze. "Helped me? I want you to explain that, Melvin. Tell me one specific thing, just one, that you've done for me in 8 years. I'm genuinely curious." Silence fell like a guillotine. Melvin's mouth opened, closed. He looked at Frances. Frances looked back, equally helpless. We've been here. Frances has," he stammered, trailing off into nothing. 8 years of living rent-free. 8 years of generous salary he hadn't earned. Vacations I'd paid for. Car I'd provided. Wedding I'd funded. They'd taken everything and given nothing. The silence stretched until it became unbearable for them. I nodded slowly. "Exactly. You have 48 hours to return the car. Keys and registration to Rick Holloway's office. I'd start making arrangements if I were you." I walked upstairs, leaving them in stunned silence, each step deliberate. Not rushed, just finished with them. As I closed my bedroom door, I heard Frances whisper, voice breaking. "He knows. Oh no, he knows something. The way he's acting, the timing. He knows about Tanzania." Yes, Frances, I knew everything. And this was only the first strike. August 18th, 2 days since I'd fired Melvin and reclaimed the car. Frances knocked on my bedroom door as I was leaving for work, blocking the hallway. Her face was carefully staged, tear-stained, trembling. "Dad, please, can we talk? Just 5 minutes?" I checked my watch but nodded. In the living room, she launched into her prepared speech. They didn't deserve this treatment. Melvin was just going through a rough period. Everyone had bad months at work. Taking the car was cruel when they had no income. She cried, real tears, because her situation was genuinely desperate. I listened without expression, then responded with devastating calm. "A rough period? Frances, Melvin has lived in my house rent-free for 8 years. Driven my car. Worked at my business, earning more than he deserved. This isn't a rough period. This is consequences for years of taking advantage." Her face crumpled. I left for work. That evening she tried again, but the tactics had changed. Melvin stood behind her like backup, and her tone shifted from pleading to aggressive. "If you don't stop this, we'll get a lawyer. We have rights. You can't just throw us out, take our things. There are laws about this." I actually smiled. Cold. No warmth in it. "By all means, hire an attorney. I'm curious what they'll tell you. I'll even give you a recommendation. Rick Holloway, excellent family law attorney." "Oh, wait, he's already representing me." The implication was clear. I'd already locked down legal protection. They were playing a game where all the pieces belonged to me. 2 days later, on August 20th, they scraped together $200 for a legal consultation. I found the receipt later. Gary Chen, solo practitioner, strip mall office near downtown Phoenix. I could imagine the scene. Frances and Melvin sitting across from some overworked attorney in a cluttered office, fluorescent lights humming, explaining their situation, hoping for different news than what they were about to receive. They returned home that evening looking devastated. The attorney had confirmed what they feared. I held all the cards legally. Arizona at will employment. Car titled in my name. My house, my rules. They had no case. They'd wasted their $200. That night, Melvin made his final desperate move. I woke around 2 in the morning to a sound downstairs. Subtle, careful. I stayed in bed, listening. Footsteps in my study, drawers opening, the soft click of a filing cabinet. Melvin was searching for documentation. The new will, bank records, anything he could use as leverage. I smiled in the darkness. Every important document was in Rick Holloway's office safe. Melvin would find nothing except old tax returns and dealership brochures. 20 minutes later, the footsteps retreated. His bedroom door closed quietly. He'd found nothing. Over the next 4 days, I watched them unravel. They argued constantly, voices raised behind their closed door, accusations flying. Francis blamed Melvin for failing at his job, for getting them into this situation. Melvin blamed Francis for my sudden hostility, suggested she must have done something to trigger it. Neither could say the real words. We tried to murder him, and somehow he knows. The debt collector starts calling. I heard Francis on the phone, voice shaking. I understand, but we need more time. Click. Another creditor. Another missed payment. Credit card statements appeared on the kitchen counter, forgotten in their panic. I glanced at them. $18,000 in combined debt. Minimum payments they couldn't make without Melvin's income. Uber charges piling up. No car meant every trip cost money they didn't have. They ate my food but avoided me at mealtimes. The few times we crossed paths, they couldn't meet my eyes. The atmosphere in the house was toxic, poisonous, waiting for the next blow to fall. I observed it all with quiet satisfaction. Watching them destroy each other was almost as satisfying as destroying them myself. One evening, their argument crescendoed loud enough that I heard through the walls. "This is your fault," Francis screamed. "If you'd just done your job properly, hit your targets, he wouldn't have had an excuse to fire you." "My fault?" Melvin's voice was defensive, angry. "What did you do to make him turn on us like this? He was fine until Tanzania. Something happened. Something you're not telling me. Did he figure out what we—" He stopped himself, but the implication hung in the air. Silence fell in their room. I stood in my study, listening to their fear, and allowed myself a moment of cold satisfaction. They were tearing each other apart. No loyalty, no unity when pressure hit, just blame and terror. This is who they really were, and I was just getting started. August 25th, Monday morning. Francis and Melvin were out job hunting via Uber, burning through money they didn't have on rides across Phoenix to interviews that led nowhere. I sat in my study making phone calls, pen poised over a guest list. Neighbors, family friends, colleagues from the dealerships. 15 people total. My tone was warm, apologetic, carefully modulated. I know things have been tense with Francis and Melvin lately. We've had our difficulties. But I'd like to smooth things over, have everyone together. This Saturday evening, 6 o'clock. Just burgers and conversation. I'd really appreciate your support. Everyone accepted. They thought I was extending an olive branch, trying to heal family wounds. They had no idea they were being invited to a public execution. That afternoon, when Francis and Melvin returned home exhausted and discouraged from another fruitless day of applications, I made my announcement. I've been thinking about how strained things have been between us. I'd like to try to make peace. I've invited some friends and neighbors over for a barbecue Saturday evening. Nothing fancy, just food and conversation. A chance for us to reset as a family. Francis and Melvin exchanged shocked glances. Was this surrender? Had I decided to back down? Francis's eyes filled with cautious hope, the first light I'd seen in them for days. "Dad, really? You mean that? You want to work things out?" I nodded, my expression carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "I think it's time we cleared the air, publicly, as a family." They missed the emphasis on publicly, too desperate for relief, for any sign of mercy, to hear the warning buried in that single word. Saturday evening arrived with perfect Arizona weather, temperature cooling to the low 90s as the sun descended, golden light washing across my backyard like a spotlight on a stage. Guests arrived carrying wine bottles and side dishes, neighbors from the surrounding Scottsdale homes, 2 managers from my dealerships, the couple from 3 houses down who'd known Frances since she was a teenager, who'd watched her grow up, a few of my golf acquaintances, 15 people total, settling into lawn chairs and patio furniture, making small talk about the heat and the upcoming football season. I worked the grill, playing the gracious host, flipping burgers, asking about people's kids, pouring drinks. Francis and Melvin circulated awkwardly, sensing something off in my forced cheerfulness, but unable to identify the threat. They smiled too much, laughed too loudly, trying to appear normal while fear flickered behind their eyes. Around 7:30, when everyone had drinks and plates of food, when the conversation had reached that comfortable hum of a successful gathering, I tapped my glass with a knife. The sharp ring cut through the chatter. Conversation died. All eyes turned to me. "Friends, Thank you for coming tonight. I stood beside the grill, glass raised, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet yard. I asked you here because I believe in transparency, especially regarding family matters. I want to tell you all the truth about my relationship with my daughter and son-in-law. Frances's face drained of color, like water running from a sink. She started to stand, but Melvin grabbed her arm, fingers digging into her flesh, making a scene now would look worse, confirm guilt. I continued, my tone calm, factual, devastating in its measured delivery. For 8 years, Frances and Melvin have lived in my home rent-free. I've provided everything: housing, employment for Melvin at my dealership, a car, vacations, financial support. Over those 8 years, I've spent approximately $280,000 supporting their lifestyle. I did this because I loved my daughter and wanted to help her family build a foundation for their future. I paused, letting that number sink in. $280,000. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, a few exchanged glances. Recently, Melvin gave me what seemed like a wonderful gift, a 2-week safari to Tanzania. Cost about $12,000. I was deeply touched by this apparent generosity from a man who'd never shown such consideration before. It seemed like a turning point, a sign they'd finally grown up, wanted to give back for all I'd provided. I pulled papers from my pocket, phone records Rick Holloway had obtained legally through subpoena. But I learned something disturbing during that trip. These are Melvin's phone records from late July. The day before my departure, he made 3 calls to Tanzania, to a safari guide named Joseph. He also transferred $8,000 to an account in Joseph's name through an international wire service. I unfolded the papers, holding them up so people could see the documentary evidence. That gift wasn't generosity. It was a murder plot. Joseph was paid to arrange my death and make it look like an animal attack, a crocodile, a charging buffalo, something believable. Then Frances and Melvin could inherit my estate immediately, rather than wait for nature to take its course. The backyard erupted like I'd thrown a match into gasoline. Frances screamed, her voice high and panicked. "Stop it! Dad, you've lost your mind. This is insane. Everyone, he's not well. His diabetes, the stress of running the business, he's confused and paranoid." But guests were already standing, backing away from her and Melvin like they carried something contagious. The neighbor woman who'd taught Frances in Sunday school 20 years ago put her hand over her mouth, looking sick. "Frances, is any of this true? Your own father?" Melvin tried to argue, his voice too loud, too aggressive. "He can't prove anything. Phone calls don't mean murder. This is a vindictive old man lying because I couldn't hit sales targets. You all know how he is. Controlling, demanding." But my calm presentation, the documentary evidence in my hands, the obvious pain in my carefully controlled voice, it was compelling in a way their denials weren't. One of the dealership managers shook his head slowly, disgust written across his face. "Ben, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry you went through this. If you need anything, character statements, testimony for any legal proceedings, you let me know." Guests began leaving, some quickly, hurrying to their cars without looking back, eager to escape the toxicity. Others paused to squeeze my shoulder, express shock or sympathy, promised to call. Within 20 minutes, the yard was empty except for me, Frances sobbing on a patio chair with her face buried in her hands, and Melvin standing frozen near the now-cold grill. Exposed, ruined, their social death complete. Everyone in Scottsdale would know by morning. The story would spread like wildfire through their social circles, their professional networks, every connection they'd built over the years. The next morning, Rick Holloway delivered the official eviction notice to the front door. 30 days to vacate the premises. August 28th, 3 days after the catastrophic barbecue. Frances and Melvin had spent those days in their bedroom, phones turned off, hiding from the world they could no longer face. They'd found a studio apartment in a rundown complex near 27th Avenue and Indian School Road, far from Scottsdale's manicured comfort. $950 per month for 400 square feet, bars on the windows, sirens at night. The kind of place they'd never imagined living. It was all they could manage. The packing was brutal and revealing. Frances stood in her childhood bedroom, the room where she'd grown up, dreamed, become who she was, and realized she was leaving it forever. Every item she packed reminded her of what she'd thrown away. She found a photo album from her 16th birthday party. Me smiling, arm around her shoulders, so proud of my little girl. She sat on the floor crying, album open on her lap, seeing the evidence of love she'd repaid with betrayal. In the garage, Melvin threw tools and sporting equipment into boxes with angry violence. Golf clubs I'd bought him, camping gear I'd funded, each item a reminder of my generosity he'd never appreciated, never earned, never deserved. They weren't just moving out. They were confronting 8 years of unearned privilege, now ending. On the evening of August 29th, their second-to-last night in my house, Frances made a decision. She'd lost everything else. She had to try one final time to reach her father. Around 8 o'clock, she knocked on my study door. I was at my desk reviewing dealership reports. Life moving forward without her, as it would continue to do. "Dad, can I talk to you, please?" Her voice cracked on the last word. I looked up, expression unreadable, but nodded. She entered and did something she hadn't done since childhood. She dropped to her knees beside my desk. Tears streamed down her face. Real tears, not the manipulation she'd perfected over the years. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I was blind and selfish and cruel. Melvin convinced me you owed us, that we deserved everything, but I know that's not an excuse. What we tried to do, I can't even say it out loud. It's unforgivable. But I loved you. I still love you. I lost my way. I'm so sorry." I looked at my daughter on her knees and felt something crack inside me. Not forgiveness, but recognition of shared pain. I saw the little girl who'd brought me dandelions from the yard, declaring them more beautiful than store-bought flowers. Who'd cried when her goldfish died and asked if we could have a funeral. Who'd hugged me so tight when I dropped her off at college, whispering, "I'll make you proud, Daddy." But I also saw the woman who'd conspired to murder me for money, who'd valued early inheritance over my life, who'd spent 8 years taking and never giving back. The two images couldn't reconcile. My voice was quiet when I spoke, each word carefully chosen. "Frances, I loved you more than anything in this world. I gave you everything I had, not just money, but trust, faith, belief in who you could become. You chose greed over that love. You decided my death was worth it if it meant accessing your inheritance a few decades early." I paused, feeling the full weight of those words. I can't forgive that. Not today. Maybe not ever. Maybe someday, years from now, when you've rebuilt your life without my support, proven you can be someone worth forgiving. Maybe then, but not now. You need to leave my house. Figure out who you really are without my money cushioning every fall. Earn back your self-respect. Then we'll see. Frances nodded, understanding she'd get no more than this possibility of distant, uncertain redemption. More than she deserved, less than she wanted. She stood and walked out, closing the door softly behind her. The next morning, August 30th, they loaded the last boxes into their rental van. 10 o'clock, already heating toward another Phoenix scorcher. I watched from my study window as they made final trips. Melvin never came to say goodbye. His pride wouldn't allow it, even now. He'd learned nothing, blamed everyone but himself. Frances paused at the door one final time, looked back at the house where she'd grown up, at the window where she could see my silhouette. She raised one hand in farewell or acknowledgement or apology. I didn't wave back. The van pulled away, exhaust pipe rattling, overloaded with their possessions. I watched until it turned the corner and disappeared from view. A week later, early September, I sat on my back patio, in the morning coolness before the heat arrived, coffee cup warm in my hands. The house was silent, truly silent for the first time in 8 years. The kind of peace I'd forgotten existed. I'd changed all the locks, installed a new security system, reclaimed every room, made the house mine again. Rick Holloway had confirmed everything was finalized, the new will executed and filed with the county. Frances receives exactly $1. The remaining $4.5 million goes to the Dignity Foundation, a charity supporting elderly victims of family financial abuse. I'd chosen the name myself, seemed appropriate. I didn't feel victory or joy. Those emotions were too simple for what I'd been through. I felt justice, balance, the restoration of order to a world that had been chaos. My life was my own again. In my calendar, I'd marked a date in October. Australia, solo, self-funded, genuinely for myself. Not a gift with hidden strings, not someone else's agenda disguised as generosity. Just an old man seeing the world while he still could. I'd learned the lesson I needed. Love doesn't mean allowing others to exploit you. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're self-respect. And family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by how people treat you. I took a sip of coffee, watched a cardinal land on the patio railing, its red feathers brilliant in the morning light. I smiled, not in triumph, but in peace. The story was over. Life continued. And it was good. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.